For the city that nearly broke me. A woman tattoos Malik's name above her breast and talks about the conspiracy to destroy blacks. This is all a fancy way to say that someone kirked out, emptied 5 or 6 or 7 shots into a still warm body. No indictment follows Malik's death, follows smoke running from a fired pistol. An old quarrel, crimson against concrete and the officer's gun still smoking. Someone says the people need to stand up, that the system's a glass house falling on only a few heads. This and the stop snitching ass are the conundrum, and damn all that blood, all those closed eyes imagining Malik's killer forever cawful to a series of cells. And you almost believe them. You do. Except the cognac in your hand is an old habit. A toast to friends buried before the daybreak of their old age. You know the truth of the talking, of the quarrels, and how history lets the blame go blameless for the blood that flows black in the street. You imagine there's a riot going on and someone is tossing a trash can through Sal's window, calling that revolution. While behind us, cell doors keep clanking closed, and Malik's casket door clanks closed, and the bodies that roll off the block and into the prisons and into the ground keep rolling. And no one will admit that this is the way America strangles itself. Cool. Thank you guys for coming. That was a great introduction. And I wanted to start with a poem to try to justify the introduction. And also, I've done a lot of readings, and usually I'm really pleased if it's a few people that show up. But I actually like you guys, because you could have went to see Charles Murray, who is not Keith Murray. And you guys have no idea who Keith Murray is. So what I will do is I'm going to read the first 2 pages of the memoir. I'll read at least one poem from the first book, some poems from the latest book, some new poems, and then do a Q&A. Just as background, the memoir is about the time I spent in prison. When I was 16, I carjacked somebody. December 7th, 1996. You tend not to forget these things. I was incarcerated the next day. I pled guilty, confessed really the day I got caught, and served 8.5 years in prison. And so I'll just say before I read from the memoir first is one of the challenges was, how do you write a memoir? I was 27 when I wrote it. I guess 25, 26, 27, but I just started my junior year at the University of Maryland, and it was published when I graduated. And one of the challenges was, how do you write a memoir when you're really, really young? And one thing I'll say is, the memoir gives you an opportunity to focus on a slice of your life and pretend it's important. And so the slice of my life that this book covers is the time that I spent in prison. So I'll read the first 2 pages because I think it sets up the overarching argument of the book in terms of how your whole life can change in a few minutes, and what I hope that the book is about and what I hope that it's not about. 30 minutes. 16 years hadn't even done a good job on my voice. It cracked in my head as I tried to explain away the police car driving my 126 pounds to the Fairfax County Jail. Everything near enough for me to touch gleamed with the color of violence. The black of the deputy's holster of guns, the broken leather of the seat I sat on, and the silver cuffs that held my hands before me in prayer. I tried to remember. When I closed my eyes, I thought about the way the gun felt in my palm. I tried to remember. I tried to remember what caliber pistol it was, but couldn't. It was automatic and weighed nothing in my palm, and I couldn't figure how something that weighed nothing could have me slumped in the back of a car driving me away from my life. My wrist almost slipped through cuffs that held me captive as jailhouse dangers swirled red in my head. I want to tell you that I could talk tough, that I was going over every way I knew to say back up off me, but I wasn't. There were titles of movies and books on my mind. Shawshank Redemption, American Me, Blood In, Blood Out, Makes Me Want to Holler, Racehorse, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. Every movie or book I'd ever read about prison bled with violence, and I knew the list I was making in my head could go on forever. Stories of robbery, rape, murder, discrimination, and what it means to not be able to go home. 16 years old, and I was headed to a jail cell, Add my name to the toll of black men behind bars. Not even old enough to buy liquor or cigarettes, but I knew I'd be stepping into the county jail in minutes. And that my mom was at home somewhere crying. When I tried to part my hands, I thought about the violence. About how real it is when a cell door closes behind you at night. I thought about needing a knife. Because from what I knew, everyone needed a knife. I stared at my shackled feet. I stared at my shackled feet. I was getting ready to learn what it meant to lock your thoughts inside of yourself and survive in a place governed by violence. A place where violence was a cloud of smoke you learned to breathe in or choked on. Sometimes there's a story that's been written again and again. Sometimes a person finds himself with a story he thinks will be in vogue forever. The story is about redemption, about overcoming. A person finds that story and starts to write it, thinking it will do him some good to tell the world how it really was. That's not this story. This is about silence and how in an 8-year period I met over a dozen people named Juvenile or Youngin or Shorty. All nicknames to tell the world that they were in prison as young boys, as children. We wore the names like badges of honor because in a way for some of us it was all we had to guard us against the fear. And we were guilty. And I was just like everyone else. I thought about the edge of a knife. Alright, cool. So now I'm going to get into some poems. I'm just going to read for a little bit. I'm going to try something new today. One thing is, I've realized this, right? Is I do these readings and people say I hate poetry. And they say it by their facial expressions. And they say it by their silence. And sometimes they say it when they get up and walk out. Now that is a litany of things that you cannot do today. But I will give you one permission. As if I had to write. One of the things I was in Chicago and I was talking to these kids and I read this poem to them. And I personally loved the poem. I mean, I had written it. I was biased, you know. And I asked the youngest, I said, what do you think the poem was about? And this dude at the front said, why do you think I know? And I was like, well, you know, I read the shit to you. And then I stepped back because I realized that we had been learned to consume poetry in a way that we aren't taught to consume much other things in life, right? Like, I hope none of you guys, well, I won't talk about that. But, so for instance, if I talk to them about music and they say, you know, I say, you like this song? They'd be like, I love the beat. And I'd be like, well, what about the lyrics? And they say, well, I don't really know those yet because it just came out. And they give themselves permission to like a song without having to know everything at once. So what I'm going to ask, and I'll read one poem randomly twice, but what I'll ask is everybody in the audience, whether you like poems already or you don't, give yourself permission not to get the whole poem. Because it might only be 2 lines that's worth it to you. But if you hear those 2 lines, you'll brag about this to your friends who wasted their time listening to Charles Murray. So, for the city that nearly broke me, only thing you need to know in here is the slang. Where I grew up, to body somebody was also like it was just slang to kill somebody. So it's a line that says a body, it means a body killed. And kafir, it's like it's wild in DC in 2000, maybe 12. It's almost like a truck had fell off on the side of the road and dumped a few crates of these hats that's like these like scarves that's prominent in the Middle East where it looks like it's knots on the end of it. Because I had all of these kids in my class wearing kafirs, and it wasn't really typical at all. So that's what the kafir refers to. For the city that nearly broke me, knots like 24 fists swayed with warmth from the boy's kafir. That black and white scarf with its useless hands clopping against the wind in protest. Against this boy and his somebody lost. Against their own swaying in the dance the lost body has lost. A boy, a somebody lost, a body in the lights of inauguration night when every light in the city fled with hope. Always losing. Always a boy left with a dozen weights, small circles on strings, pulling his head down to the ground, downcast. Drop your bucket head and make the city yours, and all that jive keeps him from running, escaping the pavement, where bodies finally fall to rest. The keffiyeh keeps him from bucking against the wind, hurtling himself to the Greyhound or Amtrak or I-95 with a book bag and hitched finger. His head shrouded in the black and white, the knots keeping his eyes down as he traverses neighborhoods with names like a nation falling. And the coffin-voiced boy is who God tells us he will save, and so those swinging knots must be some kind of redemption, a way to see the bullets that bury you constantly, as if death is the disguise hiding your wings. Elegy with an RIP shirt turning into the wind. Some days away from me, the air turns and I pray pistols into my palms, as if there is a piece that will open up with bullets, with the blucker, blucker, blucker of a hammer siren. In the street, the boys play a game they call throwback. It is football. Every man for himself as he weaves under the wires above Mississippi Avenue. The sneakers swinging above his juking body like scythes are fresh. Jordans, Air Force Ones, Chuck Taylor singing death songs when the wind blows hard enough. Touchdowns are as rare as angels, and when the boy turns his body, the RIP shirt slants against the wind, and there is a moment when he is not weighed down by gravity. When he owns the moment before he crashes into the other boys' waiting arms, and they all look like a dozen steel mannequins, controlled by the spinning sneaker strings of the dead boys above them. I actually never read this poem. I'm going to read it now. I'm going to try to figure out why I don't read it as I read it to you. I actually know exactly why. But I'm going to read it. And I'm going to read every word as it's written in the book. Okay. Elegy with a city in it. Many gone to grave. Men awed by blood, lost in the black of all that is awful. Think crack and aluminum, awed with time steals, or steals time. Black robes, awful nights when men off the streets awed us. Dead bodies sold news. What's real? Murder cap and all that. The Post, a jackleg reel of it all. Black death, all. Chocolate City, awash in red. 500 bodies to morgues, lost. Red, the gift of Glocks. Red, sometimes a dark and awful omen the best couldn't read. Death reinvented when red was the curse of men born black and lost in the drama Reagan read as war. Crack vials and cash and red in our eyes and weed, not still with a pocket full of stones. Steel in hands and a god-awful law aimed at stealing the red. But ambition burns, makes men red with greed so damn real, fattened by all that others read in a post about how real it was in them streets. This real, another Scarface, a flick that is all fools looking for something real in the suicide of wakes. As if the real is only what drowns. Think Black, Mario, Carlos, they all blackened the inside of a coffin, all real flesh in that final moment, still and nothing more, still as men plotting on stealing time from death, reeled in from the streets like dead fish. Still a short mutual destruction, still should have kept us safe. I read the obits, those maps of death, still as caskets holding men, still as the bullet, who is awed by trouble. This awful gristle and flesh torn by steel turned into thunder, asks black, dead in night's ruins, bring out the black ties, the papers say. The black hole is now on the block, still swallows men, spits them out, black-eyed, spits them out, blackboard. Reagan's curse might be real, might be what has blacks blackmailing themselves, dancing in blackface, Chocolate City red under the scrutiny, asphalt red. When we heard about black, silence stole our voices, awful silence, like death seemed odd, and still, when I sing this awful tale, there's more than a dead black man in the center. There is a city still as all the bodies that make 86 real. A city still and awful, still and bloody. I actually lied. Turns out it's like a ratio. I remember black people that have to be in a room for me to say nigga. And this room just does not meet the ratio. So I could say it like casually, but I just refuse to say it in reading the poem because it feels like then I'm just like a part of Charles Murray's discussion. He is really like the trope of my talk. Like I'm just gonna make fun of him consistently in the hope that this is being recorded. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read sections of the long poem. I'm gonna ask a question to get some audience feedback, and then I'm gonna read sections from the long poem, and then I'm gonna go to some new poems, and then I got a poem that I'm gonna come back to. So I'm gonna read the titles. The title poem is called Bastards of the Reagan Era, and it's 9 sections, and each section has a separate title. I'm gonna read the titles, and I'm gonna see if you guys know where the titles come from. Countdown to Armageddon. Bring the noise. Don't believe the hype. Night of the Living Baseheads.
Public Enemy.
Cool. You hear that? That was cool. He said Public Enemy. Usually, nobody knows, so I'm really happy that he knew. What does Sal's window refer to? So, raise your hand if you've seen Do the Right Thing. So it's like a minority of the audience that has seen Do the Right Thing. But it's interesting, right? Because it changes the way the first poem I read sounds if you recognize the illusion of Do the Right Thing. So in Do the Right Thing, at the end of the movie, Radio Raheem gets choked out by the police and he dies, right? And then there's a riot that happens and they throw a trash can through Sal's window. So I'm gonna go ahead and read this poem again just so that you can hear it with that background. But they throw a trash can through Sal's window, and in the movie that kind of becomes the lasting image of revolution. For the city that nearly broke me. A woman tattoos Malik's name above her breast and talks about the conspiracy to destroy blacks. This is all a fancy way to say that someone kirked out, empty 5 or 6 or 7 shots into a still warm body. No indictment follows Malik's death, follows smoke running from a fired pistol. An old quarrel, crimson against concrete and the officer's gun still smoking. Someone says the people need to stand up, that the system's a glass house falling on only a few heads. This and a stop stitching ass out of conundrum, and damn all that blood, all those closed eyes imagining Malik's killer forever called to a series of cells. And you almost believe them. You do, except the cognac in your hand is an old habit, a toast of friends buried before the daybreak of their old age. You know the truth of the talking, of the quarrels, and how history lets the blame go blameless for blood that flows black in the street. You imagine there's a riot going on and someone is tossing a trash can through Sal's window, calling that revolution. While behind us, cell doors keep clanking closed, and Malik's casket door clanks closed, and the bodies that roll off the block and into the prisons and into the ground keep rolling. And no one will admit that this is the way America strangles itself. Because, I just read it twice because I said I was going to read something twice, and then I was able to do that. Bastards of the Reagan Era. 1. Countdown to Armageddon. Just for setup, the poem is it's a documentary actually out right now called Red Onion State Prison, and it's a documentary about solitary confinement at Red Onion State Prison. That was one of the first of like 2 super maximum security penitentiaries built in Virginia. And so I was transferred from a place in Southampton to Southampton Correctional Center to Red Onion State Prison. And it was a 15-hour trek. And I was writing this poem, and I wanted to write a poem that explored a couple of things. One was what it meant to be on that bus ride. But 2, I didn't want to write it from my own perspective. I wanted to write, 1, what it meant to be on that bus ride, and 2, what it meant to be like 28, 29, 30 on that bus ride, seeing all these teenagers going to a super maximum security prison with you. So the voice is not my voice. It's the voice of a speaker who is like 29, 30, who's been in prison for a little bit and is seeing these kids on the bus with him. I won't read the whole poem, but, background is never useful, but it makes the writer seem cool when he offers it. Countdown to Armageddon. The farm. This collection of dying men is home for just another night. And now October's rest. Snow piles upon the dead. Snow flattens the scarlet leaves of maple trees. And crickets rule the black of night with song. Or if you're like me, you call it the noise that wakes you from what troubles sleep. The guard and his flashlight against steel bars, his voice as low and tired as mine. Authority, a gavel drop gave him makes me listen, and I strip before this man who knows me by a number. And I'm lost in shouts, and when the chain link belt and buckle wrap my waist, these nails begin to scrape the skin off my palms. My eyes still sleep, the cuffs, the bastard I pretend don't exist, put on my flesh bite. And Peanut, from 3 cages down, he stared transfixed like some mad bullfrog into this Sally Port's opaque. I almost say shook one's afraid of sleep, but think his beard enough to let the dogs of his anger loose on the world after these nights in the cell become nothing but more nights in the cell. Outside, the hawk reminds my bones of blocks that straitjacket me in these cuffs. How want for things had me on corners, running wild with bammers named Ray Ray and Quan, Dave, all of us like dogs in them streets. We were afraid is what I'm saying. All cliche and desire, all ignorant of what madness did birth the Swan Roads, Lancasters, and Oxford Nords that damn near ruined me. I stand and stare, body trapped in this back country that bleeds men like leeches. Body, a stone that's kicked from cell to God-forsaken cell, each van ahead a sign. Somewhere a light will flash and wake a man before he understands his world has gone mad. Every bus, a ride another mile away from whatever circle of streets he claimed he owned. I have braved for want of wild beasts, steel cages, called my name on bunks and rafters. I fought grown men near double my age for rep, and now this guard, he yanks against the chain so hard I buck, then buckle, a man against the leash. May God have mercy on all sleeping things. This dark that fails to hide my trembling hands and all the cracked crowns with closed eyes and what passes for dreaming here. I'm boxed in. Been here so long I sweat the funk of cells. My mother wouldn't understand. Not these half steps I take toward my bus escort to hell. I graduated high school numb, already caged with a dead man rattling about my head, and I get how these back roads will take this body and yes, bury it where I'm nobody. Another man of the barbed wire, count times, shakedowns, fist fights, shotguns, knives. And when we walk into the cold air, I'm on a corner where darkness compassing my days. All the currency I ever had was time, redundant gesture that it is. A waste that want for more, a waste we half dozen, half shuffling, scuffed and nicked on another schooner, bound for some Sing Sing, for some Angola, Folsom, Attica. They say Armageddon been in effect, but let me tell you how this business began. Alright, so we do a Q&A in a minute. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read y'all a couple new poems, and then we see how it goes. And then we do the Q&A. So, amazingly, it was this really interesting article out in Aeon today called called something like "Why Men Rape," and I was sitting at the bar, talking to somebody, and she happened to be a sex education person, right? And she goes to college, talking about sex education, and part of what she talks about is sexuality and things like sexual violence on college campuses. And so I thought it was interesting because I had just read this piece on Aeon about why men rape, and it just fucked my whole head up, because until like the 60s, rape was like clinically the fault of women, and clinically like signaled academically. I thought, damn, it took that long for men to not be obnoxious, and so I'm sitting here talking to this woman who does this work, and I'm reminded of a friend of mine named Alexander Brodsky, who works for this organization called Know Your Nine, and she once asked me to contribute to an anthology called Feminist Utopia. And so I wrote this poem for my sons for that anthology, and I figured I would pull it out today. This is like the second time I read it publicly. So if it is horrible, which it may be, it has a good message. which always saves people singing in church. If absence was the source of silence, some things my sons would never hear, not because of my reluctance to speak, or the thief that has silenced his mother's tongue, his grandmother's tongue, turned to stare at a woman who sees me turn a corner with Newport in hand far too early for the sun to be out. The sky and ground is dark as the fear and history she swallows as she crosses into what might as well be ongoing traffic. Not because of a need to hide history, those bare rooms where trust became carnage. No, these things would be a torture undiscovered. And yet, he will know because we lack a map for the place we plead every name of God we know to show us. I tell my sons about what their hands might do, long conversations about what the hands of men do. Often, his hands, my own, when I was 12 and a friend told me of men offering her money for sex and she no older than me, arms not strong enough to carry her own weight, let alone push her past all the men who wanted to own what is hers. And this was only the first of a story that would keep coming back. The numbered hurt, rape, its aftermath, and this account of trauma my boys would never know if the world were different. If war did not mean how many soldiers have imagined the body of a woman as just more land to be plundered. I keep trying to turn this into sense. My sons will hear from me a story about hands like theirs, like mine, have made something wretched of the memories of women we love. This is true, and there is a map to take us to all that hurt. Some silent saying it all, but let's say the world is ours. Let's add that to the accountant. On that day, all the silenced tongues would have speak, without fear being doubted, of the cars and hellos that became dungeons, of friends who became the darkness that swallows all into only rage and hurt remains, and sorrow. And maybe after that we can build a memory that does not demand silence. All the things that happen now as if a part of being would not be, and my sons' lives would be carved out of days in which their hands and bodies did not suggest weapons. Days where all their mothers and sisters could walk down any street in this world with the freedom that comes from knowing you will be safe after dusk, or during those moments just before dawn, or at any time when someone who was friend becomes other or might. A time when what I give them is not this world circled by harms that even here I have named all too inadequately. Alright, so I'm going to read two more and then we open up for questions. Mural for the heart. Tonight is not for my woman who would touch me before we speak. Not when the accumulation of our yesterdays hang like the last dust before us. Each memory, another haunting thing. Not when buried somewhere behind us is all that the past that we will not let die. History, our prophecy, and albatross. The myth we measure tomorrow against. Every story worth telling has 1,000 beginnings. Let me tell you this one. There was this one night on a road trip. She, my wife, was not there, already rehearsing my absence. Distance our disaster. And so, if I say the trouble began when the car stalled, I will be lying. But the car did stall. Every light inside flashing as if the emergency was something breaking inside of she and I, and not just an empty tank. Everyone wants a chance to be a hero. And so when I climbed out the truck's front seat, already I had measured the distance from the truck to the station, 1,000 yards. I once lifted my woman and carried her on my back from where we stood to the bed that I would turn into what remains when lies become shrapnel. Have you seen a man push his body against the thing as if love alone would move it? That night there were 3 of us riding. My woman was not there. 2 of us climbed out, rolled up sleeves, began pushing. Muscles strained against the darkness, the heft of the truck lurching at best. When a scrawny kid joined, his body lost inside his coat, we thought ourselves blessed. A tampon run, he said, explaining why he was there on this street So late at night, his girlfriend on the side of the road, and my woman 500 miles away, as if to say part of love is pretending to be a hero for strangers. The truck barely moved the way love barely moves when weighed down by memories. Before long, there were four of us pushing the 1,000 yards, still 1,000 yards. And then we stopped, which is to say we realized the thing you want can break you. We all knew that in time our legs would shake, that our bodies would betray us, and admit that the heart, though not useless, lacks the needed thing for some miracles. And yet, against this truth, I keep praying my woman, who is no more mine than any woman can belong to any man, but is her own constellation of music and desire, as is anyone, will forgive history, knowing 1,000 angels stand beside, exhausted too, though certain the heft of their wings will bring a gale fierce enough to lift this hurt that we refuse to name. I'll stop there. See if you guys have questions. It's like the awkward silence.
When you write memoir, what does that allow you to do that poetry doesn't allow you to do? When you write poetry, what does that allow you to do that memoir doesn't?
So when I write memoir, what does it allow me to do that poetry doesn't? And when I write poetry, what does it allow me to do that memoir doesn't? I mean, honestly, when I write poetry, I can lie, right? Or like, I mean, yeah, like when I write poetry, I can lie. I guess that's honest. And I could be other people too. Yeah, I mean, like sometimes I wrote a prison memoir, and I know a bunch of people in prison. Now, I actually didn't think that they would ever read the book because I was not as arrogant as I seem standing up here. But the thing was, I thought that maybe they would, right? And I wanted to like honor the people I wrote about. And one of the dangers of memoir is that you make somebody, like you meet somebody, right? And the thing that they want to talk to you about is probably the thing that's most pressing to them. So even if you're close friends, they don't talk to you about the mundane things in their life. They talk to you about the hurt. They talk to you about the horrors. They talk to you about the tragedies, right? They talk about the joys too, but you still end up seeing them on the margins, right? You don't see the bulk of what makes them who they are. So if you write a memoir and you're talking about somebody in prison, their margins are just filled with despair. And so one of my challenges was how do I write about others and myself, not focusing on things that end up existing on the margins. And in some ways I think I succeeded, but in some ways I think I failed because you don't live a life expecting to write a memoir. So you don't live a life necessarily paying really close attention to the heft of what a person is. You pay close attention to what's on the margins just because it's there. It jumps out. You weep with them when they tell you that story. It's a tragedy. But you don't pay that close attention to them when they tell you something that's just mundane, but it changed the shape of who they are, right? So that's the thing that memoir I grapple with. I grapple with how do you wrestle with that. But when you're writing poetry, if you think that that's important, if you conceive that that's important, then you can find ways to work that into some of the things that you write about. Or at least if you don't write about those things, you can try to find a way to allow those things that's missing to inflect and have some kind of impact on the stuff that becomes there. I like writing both. I think I think memoir as a genre is people don't think poets are intelligent. I mean, like, to be real. Like, I mean, look, if you watch the news, we might say poets don't know about politics, right? But you see random crackpot doctors commenting on every fucking thing, right? It's like, why is he talking about that, you know? And you don't find poets and poets write about everything. I mean, I think about the defense attorneys and how we deal with domestic violence, right? And I think about the poets who I know who have written about domestic violence. They have a much keener sense of what it means to be on both sides of the fence than most defense attorneys I know. But there will never be a poet who really delves into this kind of work invited to a conference with defense attorneys. And so, the tragedy is that I think I'm intelligent and I write poetry to display my intelligence, to explain my understanding of humanity, but people ignore it. But then I write nonfiction really to strip away the things I think I know and try to find something that just resonates with a person. And people read that and be like, you're really smart about these things. Why don't you come speak? Have you ever fished before? We're doing a conference on catfishing, and I think you would be great to discuss what that is. It's like, you know, so that's like a catch-22.
What was it like to transition from prison back into society?
I almost fought this to do it. I shouldn't say that. I got in this huge argument with this kid in Chicago, and then I've been having this argument all over the country about, so transition, I guess, is a better word. Usually people say re-enter, and I hate that because it suggests that when you were in prison, you weren't a part of society. And I think that's one of the problems with prison, right? Because we don't think about prison as part, like, think about it, somebody said, what was it like to transition back into society after you finished college? And he was like, what? I mean, I was in college, but I still talk to my mom, I still talk to my cousins. I went to the store, you know, but like prison is this world in which we conceive of as completely different. And the reality is that the skills that I learned in terms of how to live, I went to prison at 16. So the bulk of what I learned about being who I am, I got in prison. So I don't really think I sort of re-entered or transitioned, so to speak. And the difficulties existed, and they vary based on how old you were when you went in and how old you were when you came out. Because if you go in at 33 or you go in at 26, I mean, you already lived somewhat of a life and you know things, you know, the internet. I went in before cell phones, though. So there were certain things that I had to get accustomed to when I came home. Cell phones, laptops, everybody has the internet. I mean, I actually still remember the first thing I Googled. And I would tell you, but it makes me seem like a nerd. And because it's a camera showing, it would seem like I did that on purpose to seem like a nerd. Because nerds are cool these days. But no, like, the first thing I Googled was speed reading. But like, so I had to transition to some things in that way, right? But I don't think that fully answers your question because that transition is talking about like a transition to technology. And it was a sort of emotional transition, but the emotional transition and like the sort of dealing with the world, that was mostly because the world believed that I was on Mars. And so the world rejected me constantly, and women, and I don't mean like outright rejection, right? But I mean like, I would meet people who, this is probably why I won't ever stop going to school. Because I meet people, like, I would meet people and they finished school and I went to high school with them and they like got their college degree. They'd be like, oh yeah, you just got out of prison. You work at a bookstore. It's like, dang, you looking down on me because I work at a bookstore? No, you looking down on me because I went to prison. You know what I mean? And so it would be this constant thing where I had to figure out how to deal with my own expectations for who I wanted to be in the world with the expectations of others based on the fact that I've been to prison. I mean, the most difficult challenge was people wanting to know if I got raped, right? Like, which is actually one of the reasons Etheridge Knight said that the only person who really understands what it, and he's probably overthinking this and probably drawing a conclusion that's not necessarily true, but I think it's some truth to it. He said that the only person that really understands what it's like to be a woman walking down the street at night is to be a juvenile in prison. And I think it's some merit to that, right? And I don't think it just because of my own experience. I think it because there's so many people who I meet who want to ask me, like, have you been raped? And I remember once, a really close friend's mother was like, this is only one person too, which means that the world is by and large decent, right? But she was like, were you raped in prison? And I was like, nah, but damn, I don't believe you just asked me that in public one day after I was released. like, can I see a therapist before you go into this deep? And it was so funny though, because when she said after me, she was like, but if you were, you wouldn't tell me. But I was like, damn, that is like a different kind of reality. If you think about like sexual violence in society, like her statement, she could have been talking to anybody. And I only recognized what she meant because she was just like, anyway, so it was cool. Me and her still friends. I went to her alma mater, so I didn't hold it against them at least.
I know in a lot of your poems you treat silence as a thing that is physically present and something that has like a lot of negative effects on everybody that's involved in the situation. So I was wondering what you think that we can do to sort of dispel that silence in our own lives.
Yeah, but I mean, I probably write that way. I'm trying to figure out if I actually agree with that. You know, it's so funny. I've never said this publicly. I've changed all my passwords, so it just doesn't matter anymore. But my very first internet password was like silence. No, that's a lie. No, it was silence. I was pointing to the camera because now I realize that everybody's gonna be trying to find out what my passports are. Like, is it 11 silence? Is it like 1996 silence? SIL 1996. Yeah. But I don't know. Silence is this weird thing because I think silence, for me, I mean, part of silence is just like fear. And so I guess one of the things that we can do to display silence is think about why we are afraid of things and how do we confront like that sort of absolute lack of knowledge. So most of my time is spent in some ways like, and one I don't think I personally controlled like my obsessions. So like I went to prison, and then I became a writer. And then you can write about anything, right? But I constantly write about prison and incarceration and think about different ways to approach the idea of prison, the idea of incarceration. And then I became a lawyer and I'm working in a public defender's office. But what I find is like the silence usually equates with an absolute lack of knowledge. And so the silence is not like a decision not to speak, but an inability to speak based on not knowing anything about a wide array of subjects. And so I think, one thing that we could do if somebody was asking me advice, and particularly about the criminal justice system, is literally you could watch 2 documentaries and read 1 book and know more than anybody in your family about the criminal justice system. I mean, for real, to make it easy, you could read like 3 articles and watch 2 documentaries. So you could spend 8 hours, and then for the next 10 years, no more than like 92% of the people you'll meet. And I think that's a way to dispel the silence. And we got all of these pockets of concern in our lives, right? I've read I don't know what I think about her book yet. Rebecca sold this book, and it like kind of men explain things to me. And I just read a few essays in the book, and it was so funny because I went to the bookstore, and a woman who like the manager of the bookstore, she said, "Oh, you buying that for somebody?" And it was like a pop quiz, right? And I didn't know it because I was tired. So I was like, "Nah, I'm about to read it. I want to check it out." And she smiled. And I looked up, and she was smiling. And I was like, "Oh shit, she just pop quizzed me." Because she was like, if he says he's buying that for his wife, I'm going to hate him forever, right? Like, men always think that they should buy things for other people instead of getting educated themselves or something, But like, there was just one book I read that like opened my eyes up about a bunch of stuff. And it doesn't make me an expert on any of the things she talks about, but it's wild in which, just thinking about criminal justice reform, which is my issue, how few people I know who have taken the time to read even one article about it to have some sense about it. And so the silence is usually a product of like just not knowing,
Do you think that the issues that we find with how the correction system is today is because so many people are unaware of the actual problems with it, because they just don't appreciate themselves? Or do you think it's something deeper than that?
I mean, I think that's part of it, but I think that's part of it, and honestly, I just blame prosecutors. If you want like my simple solution, it's just prosecutors. But one of the reasons why I say my simple solution is just prosecutors is because the criminal justice system happens to be one place in which prosecutors have such an inordinate amount of power that nobody having an eye on what prosecutors do and what motivates prosecutorial behavior allows prosecutors to essentially run wild. And it's different from community to community, but one thing that's true all across the country, particularly from state to state, is that the prosecutors are the people who are able to make the decisions about sentencing, the decisions about the charging, and then those end up determining the length of prison sentence. So I would just say prosecutors, and also we don't like crime. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not a lobby for it's funny. I meet people now who say, "Dwayne, I can't believe." I always say something that's rude to people who do this, and so like people invite me places, and then they introduce me and say, "And it is beyond comprehension that this young man spent so long in prison for what wasn't even a violent crime." I'm like, I carjacked somebody. I had a gun too, And I always stand up and say it's very easy for people to support me now because I got a law degree from Yale, because I published 3 books. But the reality is that most people, it's just no lobbyists for young kids or adults who commit crimes. And so most people just don't think. I work in a public defender's office, and literally right now I have a client who bought a little puppy, right? Some things happened. Basically, the puppy was left in the house. It was wintertime. It was a storm. The puppy died. And the prosecutor gave us an offer sheet that was 5 months in jail. 1 year suspended after 5 months. What? And I'm all for animal rights. But I am not for the prosecutor making a decision about a case without knowing anything at all about my client. And so when we ask why so many people in prison, I think that like I could mention that as an anecdote, and you say, well, that's a one-off, that's at the margin. And the reality is that's not at the margin, that's kind of at the center. And that's where the glut of incarceration comes from, which is not to say the crime isn't a problem, but it's to say that I think it's not our lack of awareness as opposed to our lack of awareness about who are the decision makers and what do the cases look like that they're making their decisions on. You go in any courtroom in Pennsylvania, and there's not going to be any citizen there watching. It's just like this private dance that's done by the relevant actors who never include the victims or the perpetrators of the crime. The relevant actors being the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and the judge. And that can lead to a wildly perverse system. It's somebody raising their hand, but I think they're yawning, but I just want to put them on the spot. No, it's somebody over here that had their hand up.
Did you figure out why you don't form LGBT that much while you're reading?
Say it again?
Did you
Oh yeah, because it has the word nigga in it. And I just don't like saying it out loud in my poem on camera. That's all. I like the poem, actually. I changed the word when I read it. There's no real reason though. And then I've said the word like 6 times since then. So.
I was struck when I was reading you and your collection, as well as in the first 2 pages of your memoir, by how you mix kind of like private, interior thoughts of the speaker, or you, in the memoir, with a lot of references to films and music and history. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how popular culture and your artistic interests contribute to the way that you write poetry.
Well, I mean, I do think as a writer, we're always, I think I am always at least thinking about ways to complicate what it is I'm writing and to actually be useful and intelligent. And one way to do that is to speak to and against things that are in pop culture, but in literary culture and in my own head. And so, for instance, those first 2 pages is an essay by Elizabeth Alexander that says, "A black man says sorbet." And I read this essay, right? I had a great story about meeting Elizabeth Alexander and asking for some stuff she wrote about black men. And she gave me that literal book that she was reading from, called Black Interior, actually. And it had all of the sticky notes in it from when she did these readings. And I've been out of prison for like maybe a year and 2 months at that time. And it's like, damn, I used to read your books in prison. And now I have the book that you've been traveling with for a year with like your notes and stuff in it. It's like, it's feel really cool as a way not to answer your question. But then I think, but in that essay, Black Man Says Sorbet, she said certain stories about black men will always be in vogue. Stories about suffering, about overcoming, and it extends this notion of like the existential black man is the one who overcame suffering and the sort of son that returns home, the prodigal son, right? And so I wanted my book to push back against that, and the only way for me to do that was to remember that she said that and kind of try to engage with it in the actual text. And then in the book, I was in this wow. It leads to interesting things that happen. I was in, I guess, Minnesota at a community college reading, and I read this poem, and it's a line in this poem called "The mother of our reality show says that underground railroads are real. That is, railroads that are one-way tickets to freedom." And this older white woman comes up to me afterwards and says, you read this poem, and I don't want to ask you this question, but I'm gonna ask you. You read this poem, and I think you made a reference to this show that I watched. And I was like, what show? And she was like, Atlanta Housewives. I was like, and what was so cool was that, like, it was a reference to the Atlanta Housewives, right? But I've read this poem a few times. Nobody knows that. And what it was is this middle-aged white woman attending community college. Now, you think about it. I'm in Minnesota where water freezes when you throw it outside, right? I don't expect to connect with anyone in the audience. It's 200 people in the audience, right? And they had people introduce me, and the woman that introduced me had 3 kids, and her kids were on the stage. And like we connected because I went to community college, they went to community college. But then you got this older woman that connected with me on multiple levels, and like the sort of reference to this TV show, this reality TV show, was able to make her hear what I was saying in the poem, and able to make her see like, damn, I didn't think that we had anything in common. And we the only two that know this, you know. And then the title of that poem is "A Toothless Crackhead is the Mascot," which is a line from a Pusha T song. And the whole thing is a critique. And then it says, you know, a short outline for a film, which references a Derek Walcott poem that has that as the subtitle. And my poem does the same thing, or at least tries to do the same thing that Walcott's poem does, which is to say that it allows multiple things to happen in a poem at one time. And for you to enjoy the poem or get the poem, you don't necessarily have to get or hear or even see every layer. But if you do, then it creates a different kind of moment. And for me as a writer, you know, standing before a bunch of people, to have somebody come up to me and something resonates with them that is on that level, it's kind of dope. Because like me and this woman had this moment. And like I'll always think about her. I mean, like I'll think about her 62% of the time when I read that poem, which is nice, right? And if you write a poetry that's devoid of the world in which you live in, right? If you write fiction that's devoid of the world in which you live in, you don't get those opportunities. Now, that's cool. I love Kafka, right? I love Kafka, but people reading Kafka when Kafka was alive was like, yo, what the fuck? Like, I like this, but you like fishing. And it's okay. Kafka could do Kafka, but I think I want somebody to read my stuff and say, you know what? I like Tupac was in that poem. You know, so that's why. I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, this is a bad question to end on.
That's cool. Thanks for flagging it for us.
I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly in the poem you read twice. I just wanted to double check. Did I hear you say Isildur's Keep?
Say what?
Did I hear Isildur's Keep? Because I thought that might have been a reference to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I will end on this comment. I lied when I said that, but I wish that it was in there. But I will say this though, right? There's a funny thing about prison. I was in solitary confinement, and you know, last fight I won was in second grade, so I was frequently like not a tough guy. But I was always astonished when like the hardest dudes would like impress me with stuff that they read that I had never heard of. And my man Star is the person that introduced me. We were on the door talking about Eric Lustbader, who wrote these books like Ninja, White Ninja, shit like this. This is like adventure shit. He was like, yeah, I read those. He's like, yo, but have you ever read Lord of the Rings? Lord of the Rings would blow your mind. It's like, what? Wow, how the fuck you kill people? How do you Anyway, thank you guys.